Welcome back, guys. Hopefully all is going well. I hope these first two, Section 1, Section 2, you did all right. I see that Section 2 was 20 minutes. So a little bit shorter than the first, but I hope that we can get it even shorter. I am changing it a little bit. Usually I have we talked about it, in classroom, if it's red and bolded, that means that you need to remember this because it'll be on the test, and anything bolded also. I'm totally, since we are in a new time, we're not going to worry about that. Everything's going to be black. There is no bolded. So please just pay attention to what I'm talking about. I don't plan on really giving you tests. If I do, it'll be an open book or an open note or whatever we decide to do. So it's not going to be dire that you know certain things, like if I would bold it or put on. So let's get started. We're going to be talking about this chapter in the book. Is called A Bloody Conflict. This is the Section 3. We're going to really be talking about when America comes into the war, what these battles look like, different technologies that are going to be happening, and ultimately how the war ends. So let's get started. So I mentioned this before in section, I think section 2, about trench warfare. And this is a picture of trench warfare. And basically this created a stalemate. Before these new technologies are going to be coming in that we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides, it basically created just a stalemate. And as we go through 4, and this is no man's land, I have that on there, but let's look at this a little bit bigger. So on the top, these red words are German words, but underneath they're going to tell you what they were. So Niemandsland is, you like my German accent? Niemandsland is no man's land, okay? And this was all the area between the two fronts, or the two opposing enemies. So here, I believe, let's say this is the Germans here. This here would be the French or the American allies, or British, fighting. Okay, so this would ultimately be over on this side over here, and it'd be roughly the same thing. But here you got no man's land. Saying no man's land is because it was, like it says, already churned up by shell fire, wet weather. It became massive mud. It was hard for troops to cross, and a lot of casualties happened during this time. Here, then the next, they would have to go over barbed wire fence. So this would be the first obstacle to go over, besides dealing with artillery and gunfire. The next one would be the front line trench. This is where soldiers would be shooting machine guns. This is the first war where the use of machine guns is very prevalent. And then you look here, these are trenches. Remember I told you these trenches are interconnected amongst many other things. If you look over here, this is like a command station. And it was dig deep so they could handle the artillery fire. Here are some support trenches. Right here is a concrete blockhouse. This is for machine guns. Machine guns would be in here and would be shooting down onto the oncoming army. And then here is a reserve trench, more trenches, and then ultimately here is artillery. Okay, long-range artillery, 10 kilometers, roughly, 10 kilometers would be, I don't know, that'd be roughly, give or take, a little bit, about 10 miles. And these guns would also fire against the oncoming army. So as you can see, do you think these guys are very successful just charging? Absolutely not. The idea is these guys, artillery, but over here, would bombard these guys, kind of soften up the troops, soften up the fire, and then these guys would jump out with their bayonets, and they would try to come over and jump into these and do hand-to-hand combat. Well, with this type of technology and with this artillery and the machine guns, this was not very successful. So therefore, it kind of created this stalemate. Nobody really had the upper hand, so to speak, when it comes to advancing and victorious in some of these battles. So now let's talk a little bit about more of the technology that is coming up on this. Uh, so the first thing, in April 1915, Germans were the first country to use poisonous gas. They would unleash this gas on the opposing enemy, and these fumes would cause vomiting, blindness, and suffocation. It was a horrible method of a weapon, and it cost a lot of a horrible death. It caused a horrible death. So this invention of the gas mask becomes necessary. Um, just think, okay, so in order for you, there is you're fighting and you have to put on this gas mask. Just think of, you're looking through a tunnel and you have to make sure that you're fighting, and I can't imagine having to fight a war and then you impair your vision like that. Just think how much harder it would be to fight. The tank, that is a new technology. This was introduced by the British. The British were the first ones to bring in this tank. That is one of the first tanks. Look at it. Doesn't that look interesting? As you can see, not the track that moves to move this tank is around the whole tank, not on the bottom, but around the whole thing. Interesting, huh? Well, this was very slow. Very cumbersome, mechanically unreliable, and it was actually pretty easy to destroy. So it was able to roll over barbed wire in trenches, which was good, and it was able to get troops farther into behind the enemy's line. However, it didn't change the effect of the war very much. I mean, the ending of the war. It helped individual troops sometimes, but nothing to really change the outcome of the war. As you can see, this is 1917, about 30 to 40 years later. Just think of the technology and how has it changed. Those tanks have really looked different then. Next is the new technology, airplanes. This is the first time really airplanes are in wide use in a war. The first planes were actually before in the war. They used for reconnaissance. German airplanes and British airplanes would fly over enemy lines and look for troop buildup to kind of get an eye of where is going to be the next upcoming attacks. After a while, these airplanes are used to drop small bombs, and then eventually even they were machine guns were put on there, and they could use in dogfights, airplane to airplane combat. The one in the upper right-hand corner is the British Sopwith Camel. And then on here is down in the German Albatros DV fighter. Americans, when they came in, they were called doughboys. Doughboys because they were fresh and they were very inexperienced. Really, there is not an exact, for sure, place or idea where this nickname comes from, but this is what they're called. They're even called the doughboys in the early part in the 1943 and 1944 and that early part of the World War II when they came over. So as of right now, before the Americans come over, before the Americans are truly involved in the World War I, the German U-boats really had their run of the Atlantic Ocean. British warships tried to find the U-boats and destroy them, which this strategy did not work so well. American Admiral William S. Sims developed this idea of a convoy system. This convoy system would be a bunch of ships travel together, and they follow a warship. An American warship. So, if a U-boat wanted to come and destroy these ships carrying all these troops, they had to go through the warship first. And guess what? The United States did not lose one ship when this started this type of convoy system. So it was a very successful thing, and it really was allowed our troops to get over to the front line, to the war, safely. So in 1917, that's when we come into the war, and that's kind of when Russia gets out of the war. During this time, Russia, there's lack of a scarcity of fuel and food. So apparently they didn't have Hoover over there doing victory gardens and doing daylight saving time, and really running our country to make sure that we prosper here in America and our troops prosper over in Europe. That didn't happen in Russia. There is Tsar Nicholas, who is the second, who is the Tsar at this time, the leader. He abdicates the throne, meaning he gives it up, and an uprising occurs called the Bolshevik Revolution. This is when the communists come into power. New leader is Vladimir Lenin. He is on the bottom there. And he withdraws Russia out of the war. And he agrees with Germany, called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, it's my best way to pronounce it, to pull out of the war in March 1918. He gives up Ukraine, Poland, Baltic states, and Finland in exchange for all German troops withdraw from Russia. So Russia getting out of the war kind of opens up the Western Front. It closes off the Western Front. So Germany does not have to worry about fighting anybody in the West, any Russians. So now they can focus totally on the Eastern Front. And in the Eastern Front is France, Belgium, and they're going to be fighting Great Britain, America, and France. They are able to invade France again and push really deep into France, 40 miles away from Paris. But the U.S. and the French dig deep, and they are able to hold the Germans off. So this is the first time where the Americans really come in and really show some that they're worth some grit, and they're able to start winning some wars. Their armies battles. They come in and say, you know what, this ain't happening anymore. So they were able to hold off the treaty of. They were all able to hold off the Germans from Paris. So now, the next one big battle is the Battle of Argonne Forest. This was the largest American attack in history. 600,000 troops. Now, let's go back. What number did the National Guard and the Army have together when we declared war on Germany? I think it was 300,000, just a little over 300,000. So this attack doubled that. So we needed double the amount of what we had in just this one battle. There was heavy casualties on both sides, but Americans under General Pershing broke through the German lines and ultimately won. General Pershing, I think his name is John J. Pershing. When have we heard that before? Wasn't that the guy who was trying to find Pancho Villa and was unsuccessful? I think so, yes. But he was one of the generals over in World War I and was very successful, ultimately kind of helping the war come to an end. So, after these devastating losses, there's some things that happen over in Europe that ultimately leads Germany to give up. Austria-Hungary, there's a revolution. The Ottoman Turks surrender, and the Germans forced their emperor to step down and agreed, and in a sense stepping down, they agreed to an armistice, a ceasefire. This is a picture. They actually did this ceasefire in, let's go on to the next one because it'll tell me in my notes. Here. 11 a.m., November 11th, 1918, signed in a rail car in the Compiègne forest in France is where they signed the armistice. Now, for many years, this is going to be called Armistice Day. What does it turn into? November 11th. Yes, you are right. Armistice Day will eventually turn into Veterans Day. So next November, when we celebrate Veterans Day, not only are we celebrating our veterans, but it came about due to the signing of the ending of World War I. So in this armistice, Germany had to immediately clear troops out of Belgium and land bordering France. They had to surrender military equipment, surrender East Africa, return gold stolen from Russia, Romania, and Belgium, return all Allied POWs. POWs are prisoners of war. Clear minefields. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was nullified. So the Russian, when Vladimir Lenin pulled out of World War I and he signed this treaty, and he had to give up a bunch of land, well, that's nullified. It doesn't happen anymore. Germany, or we'll see what happens to those lands in a little bit here. And an Allied blockade of Germany will continue. So they're going to continue to blockade anything coming into Germany as well. The Allies were. Now, we're gonna start to kind of figure. The world leaders are gonna get together and they're gonna try to figure out how they can make this treaty of peace. And Wilson's statement of war aimed at really enduring peace in the world, and he wanted Germany and everybody else to kind of come out of this war being able to work together and be able to prosper. So we go to the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles. And they honestly, in what Wilson wanted, he made these Wilson's 14 points, and that was what he was talking about. And mainly it comes down to this working together, helping Germany, not really penalizing. And in the end, also, he wanted this League of Nations. And that was in his 14th point. But at Treaty of Versailles, they did not use many of Wilson's ideas. They required reparations from Germany, meaning payments. So they had to pay a $33 billion payment for war damages to the Allies. And Germany also had to take responsibility for the entire war, which is kind of humiliating. For sure, Germany can't afford to pay $33 billion back, and taking the blame is insulting. At least Wilson did get one of his ideas included, and that was the League of Nations, which was an international group to preserve peace and prevent future wars. This next picture we're going to look at is the signing of Treaty of Versailles. And then here is pictures of the new countries that are new nations that come out of World War I. If you look before, there is Austria-Hungary, Montenegro in here, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, different, Germany here. Okay, so now let's jump over and let's look at the new countries that are happening. 4 empires are going to fall. The Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and Austria-Hungary Empire. Okay, so Austria-Hungary becomes 2 countries, Austria and Hungary. Okay, we have, who else comes on the scene? Oh, here we go, Czechoslovakia. They get carved out of some of Germany and some of Austria. Actually, no, I take that back. It's carved out of what is Austria. So Austria gets carved into, the Austria-Hungary gets divided up into Yugoslavia, Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia. Romania becomes bigger, yeah. And Poland comes out of here. Oh, and look it up here. We got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. These are all, Finland comes into key here. Russia has to give up Finland. And Turkey, that used to be the Ottoman Empire. So you're going to see a lot of these empires falling and making new nations. So now, the Treaty of Versailles does not follow much of what President Wilson wants, but they do the League of Nations. President Wilson comes home and tries to get the American Congress on board. Well, he sees stiff opposition towards it. Main reason why was they saw this League of Nations as something that our forefathers, particularly Washington, warned against, that entangling alliances with foreign affairs. Remember that was foreign countries tangling alliances? And they saw this happening. And they were worried that if this League of Nations would be going to war a lot, that it would make the United States go into war as well without having the option of saying no. So Congress would declare. Well, Congress wanted the ability to declare war when the U.S. would need to, not some other country we're allied with. Compromisers would say, you know what? If you amend the league that allowed us to declare when we wanted to go war, the U.S. would join. But Wilson refused to compromise and amend that. So, ultimately, the U.S. does not ratify the Treaty of Versailles in the United States of America. We do not enter with the League of Versailles, or I'm sorry, the League of Nations. So Wilson takes it upon himself to travel the country to promote it. Okay, he wanted to promote it, but he did not have any luck. It did not work, and it kind of was hard on his body, and he eventually collapses on tour and later has a stroke. So he is taken back to Washington, and he rests for get much needed rest. Congress, instead of ratifying the Treaty of Versailles, later signed separate treaties with the Central Powers to officially end the war in 1921. And after this, the League of Nations is an official group, but the United States is not part of it. Okay, guys, that is the end. It'll be interesting to see when I hit pause or stop, how long it went. But remember, look underneath this. This will be, click on the blue link, and it should say Chapter 19, Section 3, Comprehension Questions. You answer those 3 questions, and then I will know that you listened and you paid attention and followed along with me. Again, thank you. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.